My wife told me, "You're lucky I'm still here. You have no idea how many DMs I get." I replied, "Go ahead and respond to them." She thought I was joking. I wasn't. I helped her pack while she cried, saying she didn't mean it. My name is Daniel. I am 36 years old, and that Friday night, everything changed. We were eating dinner, pasta I had made, when she looked at me like I was a burden and said I should be grateful she was still here. She said most women in her position would have upgraded by now. Then she smirked and told me I had no idea how many messages she gets. Old friends, strangers, guys with money, guys with abs. She listed them like inventory. Then she said she chooses not to respond out of loyalty, like it was a favor she was doing for me. That was the moment something clicked. Not anger, not sadness, clarity. I told her she should respond. She laughed. She thought I was being clever. I walked to the bedroom and started packing her things. She appeared in the doorway a minute later asking what I was doing. I told her I was packing her belongings. If she wanted to entertain other men, she could do it without living in my house. That's when she realized I wasn't joking.
My name is Daniel, and I am 36 years old, living a life built on structure and predictability in the outskirts of Denver, where I work in logistics operations for a regional distributor. My days follow patterns I have carefully constructed. Early mornings reviewing spreadsheets, walking through warehouses, checking inventory flows, managing shipping schedules, and returning home by 6 most evenings to a townhouse I purchased 2 years before my marriage. I am not the kind of man who seeks attention or thrives on chaos. I find comfort in routines, in quiet evenings where the television hums softly in the background, in knowing what tomorrow will likely bring. This temperament, this preference for stability, shaped how I approached my relationship with Alyssa, my wife of 7 years, my partner of 10. Alyssa is 34, and from the beginning of our relationship, I recognized that she operated differently than I did. Where I found peace in consistency, she sought validation through visibility. She maintained an active social media presence, posting carefully curated images from the gym, outfit selections posed against our living room wall, before and after transformations accompanied by vague captions about personal growth and self-discovery. Men commented frequently, leaving flame emojis and compliments that she would acknowledge with her own emojis or brief flirtatious responses. Early in our marriage, I raised concerns about these interactions, asking where she thought appropriate boundaries should exist between a married woman and men who were clearly interested in more than friendship. Her response was swift and dismissive. I was being insecure. I was being dramatic. I was projecting my own inadequacies onto her innocent social interactions. I accepted this explanation because arguing felt more exhausting than adapting, and I told myself that her need for external validation was simply part of who she was, something I should learn to accommodate rather than challenge. For most of our marriage, I characterized our relationship as stable rather than passionate. We were not the couple who fought violently or loved dramatically. We paid our bills on time, split groceries and utilities, maintained separate financial accounts, and coexisted without major conflict. The townhouse remained legally mine, the mortgage attached solely to my name, a detail that felt insignificant when we were functioning well, but would prove crucial later. I told myself we were not unhappy, that the absence of visible problems meant the presence of contentment, that routine companionship was a mature form of love that others simply did not understand. Looking back now, I realize I was confusing the absence of conflict with the presence of connection, mistaking her tolerance of our arrangement for commitment to our partnership. About a month before everything changed, I began noticing shifts in Alyssa's behavior that were subtle at first but became increasingly consistent. She started arriving home later than usual, offering vague explanations about errands or stopping by a friend's place. Her phone, which had always been present but peripheral, became an extension of her hand, never more than inches from her reach, the screen lighting up constantly with notifications she would glance at and smile about without explanation. When I asked simple questions about her day or mentioned something happening at work, she responded with an edge in her voice that suggested I was interrupting something far more important than our conversation. The atmosphere in our home began to carry a tension I could not name, a feeling that I was being evaluated against some invisible standard and found wanting. I did not confront these observations directly because I had learned that questioning Alyssa's behavior typically resulted in accusations of insecurity, and I preferred peace to validation. That preference, that willingness to accept discomfort rather than demand clarity, was perhaps my greatest mistake, one that allowed disrespect to build gradually until it finally arrived with such casual confidence that she did not even recognize she had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed.
Last Friday night arrived like any other evening in our established routine. I had prepared pasta for dinner, standing at the stove stirring sauce while Alyssa moved through the house with her phone perpetually in hand, the glow of the screen reflecting off her face in the dimming light. We sat down at the kitchen table together, a gesture toward normalcy that had become increasingly hollow over recent weeks. I served the food and began talking about a supply delay at work, explaining how a missed shipment would impact our warehouse operations for the following week. Alyssa chewed mechanically while scrolling through her phone, her eyes never lifting to meet mine, her attention completely absorbed by whatever messages or notifications demanded her focus. I stopped speaking mid-sentence, letting the silence stretch between us until it became uncomfortable enough to notice. I asked her directly if everything was okay, if something was bothering her, if there was a reason she seemed so distant lately. She sighed heavily, the kind of exasperated exhale that communicates annoyance rather than sadness, and looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. It was not anger or frustration, but something closer to condescension, the way someone might regard a problem they had grown tired of managing. She told me, with shocking casualness, that I should be grateful she was still here. She said most women in her position would have upgraded by now, would have traded their current situation for something better, someone better. Then she smirked, a small, confident smile that suggested she was sharing privileged information, and added that I had no idea how many messages she received. She said it like stating a fact, like presenting evidence in a negotiation, like showing me leverage I did not know she possessed. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse her of infidelity or demand to see her phone. I simply asked her to clarify what she meant, to explain the statement she had just made so casually. She leaned back in her chair, physically distancing herself as if to emphasize the power dynamic she believed existed between us. She explained that men messaged her constantly, old friends reaching out, strangers sliding into her DMs, guys with money making offers, guys with impressive physiques sending compliments. She listed these categories like inventory, like options she was cataloging for future reference. Then she told me she chose not to respond to these messages out of loyalty to our marriage, that her restraint was a favor she was doing for me, a gift of fidelity I should recognize and appreciate. That was the precise moment something fundamental shifted inside me. Not anger, which would have been hot and reactive, not sadness, which would have felt heavy and consuming. What I experienced was clarity, sudden and absolute, like someone had turned on lights in a room where I had been stumbling around in darkness for months. I told her calmly that she should respond to those messages. She laughed immediately, assuming I was being sarcastic, thinking I was trying to call her bluff or manipulate her into backing down from her position. I was not joking. I was not testing her. I was giving her exactly what she had just told me she wanted, permission to pursue the options she valued more than our marriage. She said, "Okay," with casual dismissiveness and returned her attention to her phone, still believing this was some kind of game we were playing, still completely unaware that the conversation we were having was not a negotiation, but an ending. After telling her to respond to those messages, I finished eating my pasta while she continued scrolling through her phone, still smiling at whatever content illuminated her screen. I took my plate to the sink, rinsed it carefully, placed it in the dishwasher with the same methodical attention I gave to every routine task, and then walked past her without another word. I went directly to our bedroom, opened her closet, and pulled down the largest suitcase from the top shelf where we stored luggage between the occasional trips we took. I set it on the bed,
unzipped it completely, and began systematically packing her belongings. I started with the clothes she wore most frequently. Her work outfits hung neatly in dry cleaning bags, her gym clothes folded in drawers, the leather jacket she grabbed reflexively every morning from the hook by the door. I folded everything with care, not because I was angry and trying to prove composure, but because doing things properly was simply how I operated regardless of emotional context. Alyssa appeared in the doorway approximately 1 minute later, confusion replacing the smugness that had characterized her expression at dinner. She asked what I was doing, her voice carrying the first hint of uncertainty I had heard from her in weeks. I told her plainly that I was packing her things. She stared at me like I had suddenly begun speaking a foreign language, asked if I was seriously doing this, if I actually meant what I was implying. I said yes, I was completely serious. If she wanted to entertain relationships with other men, to explore the options she had so carefully cataloged, she could do so without living in my house. She laughed again, but the sound was sharper now, edged with nervousness rather than confidence. She accused me of being dramatic, of trying to scare her into apologizing, of performing some kind of masculine intimidation tactic she expected me to abandon once I felt sufficiently validated. I did not stop packing. I continued folding clothes, placing them carefully in the suitcase while she stood in the doorway watching. I told her this was not a tactic or a threat or a negotiation strategy. I explained that I was not interested in remaining married to someone who discussed loyalty as if it were a sacrifice she was making, as if staying faithful was a favor I should be grateful to receive. She crossed her arms defensively and insisted I was twisting her words, that she never said she wanted to leave, that I was overreacting to what was obviously just a joke between partners. I looked directly at her and said something I had been thinking for weeks without having the language to express it. People joke with equals. Threats are not jokes. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a softer register, and said she did not mean it the way it sounded. She blamed stress, claimed she had been feeling unseen lately, accused me of not fighting for our relationship the way a husband should. I zipped the suitcase halfway and told her I was not going to audition for my own marriage, that I would not compete for a position I already held, that respect either existed or it did not. That was when she returned to the messages again, telling me she could have options tomorrow if she wanted them, warning me I would regret choosing calm detachment over jealous desperation. I told her she was free to test that theory, just not from my house.
She left around midnight, not with the dramatic door slam I had half expected, but with a quiet, defeated shuffle that somehow felt more final. She picked up the suitcases I had carefully packed, asked one last time if I was certain about this decision, and walked out when I offered no response. I locked the door behind her and stood with my forehead pressed against the cool wood for several seconds, not because I wanted her to return, not because I regretted my decision, but because endings carry weight, even when they are absolutely necessary. I slept better that night than I had in months, waking the next morning with unusual clarity and energy. I made coffee, fed the dog, moved through my routine in a house that felt quieter but not emptier, noticing immediately the absence of tension that had become so constant I had stopped recognizing it as abnormal. At 7:14 in the morning, my phone began buzzing with incoming calls from Alyssa. I let them ring through to voicemail. A text message arrived moments later explaining she had barely slept, that she was staying at a friend's place, that we needed to talk like adults because last night had gotten out of hand. I read the message once and set my phone face down on the kitchen counter. Another text followed within minutes, this one reframing her DM comment as venting, as the kind of exaggeration everyone engages in, insisting I had escalated the situation unnecessarily. I did not respond. Around 9 o'clock, she called again, then sent a longer message explaining how hurt she was that I would throw her out without warning, how even if she was wrong, I should have fought harder for us, how marriages do not end over words. I finally replied with a single message. I told her this did not end over words, but over the comfort with which she used them.
I explained I was not interested in rehashing the previous night's conversation. I informed her we would communicate through email about logistics going forward, nothing more. She responded immediately, her tone shifting from pleading to angry. She accused me of being cruel, of punishing her instead of fixing our problems, of enjoying the power dynamic I had created. That message confirmed what I already knew. I had made the correct decision. By noon, she appeared at my door without invitation or warning, knocking as if she still belonged there, as if the previous 12 hours had been some kind of temporary misunderstanding we could laugh about later. I opened the door but did not step aside to let her enter. She tried to move past me anyway, and I blocked the doorway with my body. She said she needed more clothes, items she had forgotten in her rush to leave. I told her I would box whatever she needed and leave it on the porch later that afternoon. She accused me of being controlling, of treating her like a stranger. I reminded her calmly that this was my house and she no longer lived here. That word, lived, hit her with visible force. She insisted I could not erase 10 years like this, could not simply delete our history. I told her I was not erasing anything, I was accepting it exactly as it was. She stood on my porch, searching my face for hesitation, for the crack in my resolve she could exploit. She found nothing. Before leaving, she said something quieter, almost to herself. She never thought I would actually choose myself. Neither did I.
The first week stretched into the second with a quietness I had not anticipated. Not peaceful in any dramatic sense, just neutral. Like background noise I had grown accustomed to had suddenly ceased, and my brain needed time to recalibrate to the absence. Alyssa did not respect the email boundary for long. She sent one message about picking up additional clothes. Fine, I boxed them and left them on the porch as promised. Then she emailed about the dog we technically co-owned, then about mail that continued arriving in her name, then about whether I had told anyone yet about our separation. Each message contained a practical excuse wrapped carefully around an emotional hook, an attempt to initiate conversation disguised as logistical necessity. I kept my replies short, providing only dates, times, and concrete logistics. This seemed to frustrate her more than if I had engaged in argument. A few days later, her strategy shifted noticeably. The emails turned apologetic, taking responsibility in the qualified way people do when they want credit for acknowledgement without actually changing their position. She claimed she had been insecure, that social media had messed with her head, that she never physically cheated, an accusation I had never made. She said she panicked when she felt me pulling away emotionally, even though I had not pulled away at all, but had simply stopped tolerating disrespect. She asked if we could meet for coffee on neutral territory, just to talk like adults. I declined, without explanation. That was when she started telling people her version of events. I discovered this through a mutual friend who texted to check on me, mentioning that Alyssa had told him I kicked her out over a joke, that I was cold and uncommunicative, that I refused to work on our marriage, that I had blindsided her without warning or conversation. I did not correct him in detail, did not offer my side of the story or defend my decisions. I simply said there was more to the situation than he had heard, and that I was at peace with my choices. He said he could hear that in my voice, that whatever had happened, I sounded clearer than I had in years. By the second week, Alyssa stopped sounding hurt and started sounding angry again. She accused me of humiliating her, claimed people were asking questions she did not know how to answer, insisted I was making her look disposable to our social circle. That sentence stuck with me. She had no issue making me feel replaceable within our marriage, but being treated as optional herself felt like an insult she could not tolerate. She asked directly if I was seeing someone else already, if my decisive action was motivated by another woman waiting in the wings. I did not answer that question at all. Then came the message that revealed everything I needed to understand about how she had viewed our entire relationship. She wrote that she never thought I would actually follow through, that she assumed I would cool off after a few days and chase her, that this was how it usually goes in relationships. Men get scared, men apologize, men compete for female attention. She said she had misjudged me, had miscalculated my capacity for decisive action. She was absolutely right. She had built her entire approach to our marriage on the assumption that I would tolerate anything to avoid being alone,
And when that assumption proved false, she had no backup strategy except blame.
I blocked her on a Tuesday morning, not in a burst of emotion following an argument, not as retaliation for something she had said, but as a calm administrative decision made during a regular workday. I had just finished a meeting about warehouse efficiency when I returned to my desk and saw 3 missed calls and a paragraph-long text preview waiting on my phone screen. The pattern had become entirely predictable. A practical opening about some item she needed or some question about paperwork, followed by an emotional pivot into what I had done wrong, concluded with a subtle accusation designed to make me feel guilty for maintaining boundaries. I did not open the message. I sat at my desk, unlocked my phone, and methodically went through every platform where we were connected. Phone numbers, text messages, social media accounts, email forwarding rules. I blocked her presence everywhere except for one email address I created specifically for legal communication. I labeled it clearly in my contacts as Alyssa, legal only, and muted all notifications so messages would arrive without disrupting my day. Then I set my phone face down and returned to work. The silence that followed was immediate and remarkably noticeable. No buzzing interrupting meetings, no checking my phone anxiously to see what tone the next message would carry, no wondering what emergency or accusation would arrive next. I had not realized how much mental space her constant contact had been occupying until it was suddenly gone. She noticed within an hour. She emailed the legal address, asking why her calls were not going through, why her messages were showing as undelivered. I replied once, briefly and clearly. I told her I was blocking all personal contact channels to establish clarity and boundaries. I explained that all communication going forward would be strictly limited to legal logistics or would go through attorneys once I retained one. Her response came fast and angry. She accused me of erasing me from my life, claimed blocking a spouse was cruel and emotionally abusive, insisted it proved I had never really cared about her at all. She said adults do not block their spouses, that mature people work through problems rather than running away. I did not respond to any of these accusations. That same afternoon, she tried a different angle, sending an email from an account I had not blocked yet, this one softer in tone. She said she just wanted closure, that she deserved at least one final conversation, that disappearing like this without explanation was immature and cowardly. I still did not respond. By the end of the week, the emails slowed significantly. The tone shifted again, shorter, sharper, then eventually nothing at all. What surprised me most was not the quiet that came from her side, but the quiet that developed within me. I stopped replaying our final conversation in my head, stopped imagining alternate endings where I explained things more clearly or reacted differently. There was nothing left to explain. She understood perfectly well what had happened and why. She simply did not like the outcome and thought if she kept talking, she could negotiate a different result. Blocking her was not punishment or revenge, it was acknowledgement. The relationship had already ended the moment she told me I should be grateful she had not left yet. Everything after that was just noise, and I was no longer interested in listening to noise when I could have silence instead. Blocking her did not end things the way I thought it would. It changed the shape of them, redirected the pressure through different channels I had not anticipated. About a week after I blocked all direct contact, her sister showed up at my door on a Saturday afternoon without warning, standing on my porch like this was still a shared space she had permission to enter. I did not invite her inside. We talked outside, where neighbors could see, where the conversation remained public and accountable. She told me Alyssa was not doing well, that she was embarrassed and struggling, that she had never been blocked by anyone before and the silence was making her spiral into anxiety and depression. She asked if I could just unblock her long enough to give her closure, to have one final conversation that might help her move forward. I told her no. I explained calmly that closure is not something you receive from another person, like a gift or a permission slip.
Closure is something you accept internally when you recognize a conversation has already finished, when you stop waiting for a different ending and acknowledge the one that exists. I told her Alyssa had said what she needed to say during our last night together. I had listened carefully, and I had responded with action rather than argument. That was the end. There was nothing left to discuss, no magical conversation that would make the outcome feel better or more fair. Her sister said I was being unnecessarily harsh, that Alyssa was just insecure, that social media messes with women's heads and makes them say things they do not fully mean. I responded that insecurity explains behavior but does not excuse it. Understanding why someone disrespects you does not create an obligation to tolerate it continuing. She left frustrated, clearly having expected that a personal appeal would soften my position. I closed the door and went back to organizing my garage, a weekend project I had been putting off for months. Later that night, I discovered through a mutual friend's offhand comment that Alyssa had been posting vague content online. Quotes about betrayal and being discarded, about men who cannot handle confident women, about choosing yourself when others refuse to see your worth. People commented with enthusiastic support, heart emojis and validating messages. You deserve better. He never deserved you. His loss, queen. I did not engage with any of it. I did not watch her stories or click through her profiles. I did not respond to messages from acquaintances fishing for drama or trying to get my side of the story. What I noticed was how quickly the narrative shifted once there was no reaction from me to fuel it. Without resistance, there was nothing to push against. Her posts got less attention when they were just statements floating in a vacuum rather than part of an ongoing conflict people could follow. A mutual friend mentioned that Alyssa kept asking people if I had met someone else, if that was the real reason for my sudden coldness. She could not accept that the block was not about another woman. It was about self-respect. That seemed harder for her to process than simple rejection would have been. If I had left for someone else, she could position herself as the victim of betrayal. But leaving simply because I refused to tolerate disrespect left her without a clear villain. And that ambiguity seemed to bother her more than the ending itself.
I focused on practical tasks that signaled permanence rather than temporary separation. I scheduled a consultation with a divorce lawyer that Friday, not aggressively or vengefully, just responsibly. I treated it like any other appointment, arriving on time with documents organized in a folder, marriage certificate, property deed, financial statements. The lawyer was professional and efficient, asking direct questions about assets and timelines. I answered each one clearly. The house was mine, purchased before marriage, with my name alone on the mortgage and title. No debate, no complexity. We had no children, maintained separate bank accounts, owned no property together. The lawyer said this would be straightforward, probably finalized within a few months, depending on her cooperation. I updated practical matters systematically. I removed Alyssa from beneficiary designations on my retirement accounts and life insurance policy. I changed passwords on shared streaming services and subscription accounts. I updated emergency contact information at work. These were quiet tasks that carried significant weight, each one a small declaration that the future I was building no longer included her. One evening, while sorting through a drawer in the bedroom, I found an old photograph of us from early in our relationship. We looked younger, softer, less guarded. I stared at it for a full minute, feeling something close to nostalgia, remembering who we were before patterns solidified into problems. Then I threw it away, not out of bitterness, but out of honesty. That version of us did not exist anymore, and pretending it did was exactly how I had ended up tolerating things I should never have accepted. Alyssa sent one last email through the legal address before her attorney got involved. No accusations this time, no apologies, just a single sentence saying she never thought I would actually walk away. I did not reply, because the truth was simple and required no explanation. I did not walk away from anything. I stood still. She just kept moving in directions that took her further from where I was willing to go, and eventually the distance became too great to pretend we were still standing together. The divorce process moved quietly over the following weeks. Clean paperwork, no property disputes, no dramatic hearings or courtroom confrontations. She tried once to negotiate for something symbolic, claiming she deserved compensation for emotional investment or some shared asset that had never existed. Her lawyer presented it half-heartedly, and my lawyer shut it down efficiently with documentation proving separate ownership. The day the papers were finalized, I received an email from my attorney with the court's signature and official stamp. I read through the document once to confirm everything was correct, then saved it in a folder on my computer labeled simply Closed Matters. That evening, I went home and cooked dinner like it was any other night. No celebration, no ritualistic burning of wedding photos, no drinking alone in contemplation. Just acknowledgement that a chapter had ended and a new one had already begun without fanfare. What surprised me most was how little ceremony the ending actually required once the decision had been made clearly. There was no dramatic moment of freedom, no sudden lightness, just the quiet recognition that I was no longer bound to someone who viewed our marriage as leverage rather than partnership. And that realization felt less like victory and more like finally setting down a heavy bag I had been carrying for so long I had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. A few weeks after everything was finalized, something unexpected happened. Not dramatic, not confrontational, just a moment of contrast that made the entire situation clearer than any argument ever could. I ran into Alyssa at a grocery store across town, somewhere neither of us typically shopped. I was picking up items for a dinner I was making for myself, moving through aisles with the relaxed pace of someone who had nowhere else to be. I almost did not recognize her at first. Same face, same carefully styled hair, but the energy radiating from her was different, restless, performing even when no one was watching, scanning the environment constantly as if checking to see who might be noticing her. She saw me at the end of the cereal aisle and froze completely, her cart stopping mid-push. I kept walking, not to avoid her, but because I genuinely had no reason to stop. My shopping list was not complete, and she was no longer someone whose presence altered my plans. She called my name anyway, her voice carrying that forced, casual tone people use when they are trying to seem unaffected. I turned around and said hi, with the same polite neutrality I would offer to any acquaintance I used to know well, but no longer needed to explain myself to. She looked relieved initially that I was calm, then confused, then slightly offended by how little emotion there was for her to read in my expression. She told me she hoped I was doing well, the kind of meaningless pleasantry that fills space without communicating anything. I said I was. She asked if I was seeing anyone, the question loaded with unspoken implications. I said no, and that simple answer seemed to bother her more than if I had said yes. She mentioned she was dating someone now, said it like she was checking for a reaction, waiting to see if jealousy or regret would flash across my face. I nodded and said I hoped it was going well for her. There was a pause where she clearly expected something else. A question about who he was, a comment about how quickly she had moved on, visible jealousy, regret, anything that would confirm I still cared enough to be hurt. None came. She finally said she never thought things would end the way they did, that she did not expect me to actually follow through with divorce. That sentence again, like a refrain she kept returning to, as if the problem was my follow-through rather than her initial disrespect. I told her calmly that the follow-through was the only honest part of the whole situation. I explained that I listened when she told me who she thought she was and what she thought I was worth, and I simply took her at her word. She started to say she did not mean it like that, beginning the familiar defense. I stopped her, gently but firmly. I told her that intent matters less than comfort, that people say what they are most comfortable believing, and in that moment, at our kitchen table, she had been comfortable positioning herself above me. I said I did not blame her for it, but I also was not coming back. That was the first time she looked small instead of defensive, diminished instead of angry. We stood there for another few seconds in awkward silence. Then she said she should go. I agreed. I watched her walk away, pushing her cart, and felt something close to gratitude, not for the pain or the ending, but for the clarity it had forced me to find. That night after the grocery store encounter, I sat on my couch with a beer and thought about something that had been forming in my mind for weeks, but had never quite crystallized into clear language. I had not left my marriage because Alyssa talked to other men. I had not left because she posted too much on social media or needed validation from strangers. I left because she spoke to me like I was replaceable and expected gratitude for not acting on it. That distinction matters more than most people realize.
Disrespect does not always arrive with shouting or obvious cruelty. Sometimes it shows up dressed as jokes, delivered with smirks, disguised as observations about reality. It appears as comparisons you did not ask for, as reminders of options you are supposed to feel threatened by, as someone telling you they are doing you a favor by staying in a relationship they chose to enter. The moment you accept that framing, the moment you begin negotiating for basic respect, you have already lost something fundamental. You have accepted the premise that your worth is up for debate, that their presence in your life is charity rather than mutual choice. I thought about all the times I had smoothed over small disrespects, telling myself Alyssa was just joking, or that I was being too sensitive, or that this was just how she communicated. I had confused tolerance with strength, had mistaken endurance for commitment. I had believed that accepting poor treatment without complaint made me mature, when actually it just made me complicit in my own diminishment. The relationship did not end because of one conversation about DMs. It ended because that conversation revealed a foundation I had been ignoring. She believed she was settling by being with me, and she wanted me to know it. What I learned through this entire experience is that walking away from disrespect is not about pride or ego or refusing to compromise. It is about recognizing that some compromises cost more than the relationship is worth. When someone needs you to feel inferior so they can feel valuable, that is not love, that is control. When someone presents loyalty as a sacrifice they are making rather than a commitment they are choosing, they are not your partner, they are your judge, and they have already decided you are guilty of not being good enough. I also learned that people respect decisive action more than they respect explanation. I could have spent months arguing with Alyssa about why her comment was hurtful, about what she really meant, about whether she was joking or serious. Instead, I took her at her word and acted accordingly. That simple decision, believing what people tell you about themselves, eliminated all ambiguity. She told me she had options and was doing me a favor by not exploring them. I freed her to explore them. She could not argue with that logic because it was her logic. I just refused to play my assigned role of grateful recipient. The clarity that came from this approach was startling. Without negotiation, there was nothing to manipulate. Without explanation, there was nothing to twist. I simply said, through my actions, if this is how you see me in our marriage, then we are done. The cleanness of it, the finality, was more powerful than any argument I could have constructed, and it taught me something I will carry forward. Self-respect is not something you debate, it is something you demonstrate by refusing to accept anything less.
Several months have passed now since that night in the kitchen when everything changed. Life did not transform overnight with some dramatic montage of self-improvement. There was no sudden romance, no revenge body, no social media posts about leveling up or winning at life. What happened instead was quieter and more permanent. I stopped feeling the need to explain myself to people who had already decided what they thought. I stopped scanning rooms for approval or adjusting my tone to avoid conflict. I stopped assuming that stability meant enduring whatever came my way without complaint. The house stayed clean in a way it never had when I was accommodating someone else's habits. The routine stayed mine, shaped around preferences I had forgotten I was allowed to have. I ate dinner at whatever time felt right, watched shows I actually enjoyed, went to bed when I was tired rather than waiting for someone else to finish scrolling. These sound like small freedoms, but they accumulate. They build into a life that feels aligned instead of negotiated. People asked if I missed her. I gave them an honest answer that seemed to surprise them. I missed who I thought she was, not who she chose to be when she believed she had leverage. That distinction matters. I was not mourning the loss of the real Alyssa, but grieving the death of an illusion I had maintained about who we were together. The woman I thought I married would never have dangled other options in front of me as proof of her value. The actual woman I married was comfortable doing exactly that, and once I accepted that reality, there was nothing left to miss. The silence in my life became something I actively protected, rather than something I endured. I turned down social obligations that felt draining. I stopped maintaining friendships that were based on shared history rather than current connection.
I became selfish in the best sense of the word, oriented toward my own well-being rather than everyone else's comfort. People who knew me before remarked that I seemed different. A coworker said I looked lighter. My sister told me I sounded clearer, like someone who had finally stopped bracing for impact. None of them knew the full story, and I did not offer it. I learned that explaining yourself invites debate, and I was no longer interested in defending decisions I had already lived through. I started doing things I had put off during the marriage. Small things mostly, projects around the house, hobbies I had abandoned, reconnecting with friends Alyssa had not particularly liked. Each action was a small reclamation of space I had given away without realizing it. I painted the bedroom a color I preferred. I rearranged furniture to suit my habits rather than compromise positions. I bought groceries without considering anyone else's preferences. These decisions sound insignificant when listed like this, but together they represented something crucial. I was rebuilding a life that belonged completely to me. What surprised me most was not how good it felt to be alone, but how much better it felt than being with someone who made me feel alone. The relationship had been so subtly draining that I had not recognized the exhaustion until it was gone. Now, sitting in my quiet house on a weeknight with no one to manage or accommodate, I felt something I had not experienced in years: contentment. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but the foundation for it. And that felt like enough. If Alyssa ever reads this somehow, I hope she understands one thing. I did not block her out of anger or cruelty or a desire to punish her for what she said. I blocked her because I finally listened. Really listened. Not to what she claimed she meant or how she tried to reframe it afterward, but to what she said when she thought she had power in the conversation. "You're lucky I'm still here." Those 6 words contained everything I needed to understand about how she viewed our marriage and my place in it. I was not her partner. I was her safety net, the reliable option she kept available while shopping for better alternatives. The truth is, I do not think she is a terrible person. I think she is someone who never learned the difference between attention and respect, between having options and having value, between being wanted and being needed. Social media taught her that visibility equals worth, that the number of messages in her inbox somehow correlates to her importance as a person. She built her self-esteem on a foundation of external validation, and when that foundation required my diminishment to stay stable, she chose it without hesitation. I cannot fix that for her. I can only refuse to participate in it. What I learned through this entire experience is something I wish I had understood years ago. Self-respect is not selfish. Boundaries are not cruelty. Walking away from people who disrespect you is not giving up on them. It is refusing to give up on yourself. I spent years believing that a good partner endures, compromises, tolerates, adapts, and those things are true to a point. But there is a line where tolerance becomes self-abandonment, and I crossed it so gradually I did not notice until I was standing on the other side, wondering how I got there. The moment Alyssa told me I should be grateful she had not upgraded yet, she gave me permission to stop pretending. And the moment I took her at her word, instead of negotiating for a kinder interpretation, I took back power I had been giving away in tiny increments for years. I did not leave because I stopped loving her. I left because I finally started respecting myself more than I feared being alone. If there is anything I want someone reading this to take away, it is this. When people show you who they are, believe them, not who they claim to be when they are apologizing or who they promise to become if you just give them another chance. Believe who they are when they think they have the upper hand, when they are comfortable, when they are not performing for forgiveness. That version is the truth. Everything else is damage control. I am not standing here months later pretending I won something. There are no winners in divorce, no victories in walking away from 10 years of shared history. But there is something else, something quieter and more sustainable. Peace. The peace of knowing I will never again accept disrespect disguised as jokes. The peace of living in a space where I do not have to manage someone else's ego to maintain basic dignity. The peace of choosing myself, cleanly and without apology.
You're lucky I'm still here. She was wrong about that. Turns out, I am the lucky one. Lucky I finally listened. Lucky I finally left. Lucky I finally understood that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop fighting for someone who never fought for you.